Hi everyone, I'm Pauluna and I create custom content for The Sims 4. In this new video series, I want to show you the harsh truth behind creating custom content. In my tutorials, I usually show the perfect way to achieve a result. To keep things short and simple for beginners, I demonstrate fairly simple projects. This is, of course, useful for those beginners, but some of you probably want to learn even more. However, it's not always easy to capture that in a dedicated tutorial. That's why I'm showing you one of my projects in a time-lapse, explaining what I'm actually doing and sharing useful tips. I hope this will give you new ways of thinking when facing problems, and at the same time I want to encourage you not to give up and keep learning. Honestly, I feel a little embarrassed showing my entire process because sometimes silly things happen, but this is just the truth. Before I start anything, I need to have a rough idea of what I want to create. For that, I browse Pinterest or the Sims catalog. For this project, I was inspired by this image. So I want to create a cardigan with a shirt and a denim skirt for children. Since I'm not yet able to create completely custom clothing from scratch, I look for in-game assets that match well. The easiest way is to use something already made for children, but using assets from other age groups and shrinking them is also possible. Once I've gathered everything, I open a mesh and put together a rough version of my vision. In this case, I separated the cardigan from the rest and then added the shirt and the skirt. At this point, I realized that the bow on the skirt was embedded in the UV map, so I deleted that part and used E to extrude new faces to fill the gap. By the way, I couldn't find any trustworthy software to display my keystrokes on screen, but I will describe and display important keys and actions myself. Next, I adjusted and extended the cardigan. I used proportional editing to ensure smooth deformation. Then I deleted the parts of the shirt and skirt that wouldn't be visible due to the cardigan. Here, I originally wanted the skirt to stand out in a more 3D way, so I extruded an additional row and connected it to the shirt. However, I later scrapped that idea. To zoom in closely without the camera clipping through the body, you can press 5 on the numpad. Once the shirt and skirt looked decent, I moved on to the cardigan. There shouldn't be any gaps between the meshes. Initially, I tried filling the missing parts manually, but then I had a better idea. But first, to avoid losing something I might regret later, I separated and hid the lower part of the cardigan. At this stage, the cardigan had no thickness except at the end of the sleeves. So I separated the middle part of the cardigan from the sleeves and added the solidify modifier. This allowed me to set the thickness. Once I was happy with it, I applied the modifier. Next, I selected the new edges and separated them from the rest. Since the solidify modifier applied thickness to areas that wouldn't even be visible, those extra polygons were unnecessary. I removed them to optimize the mesh. First, I deleted the faces along the edge and then used the L key to select and remove the remaining large section at once. You need to be careful here not to accidentally delete part of the outer mesh. Then I cleaned up the mesh. That means merging the vertices by distance and fixing shading issues by either selecting edges and pressing V, or selecting areas, separating them with P, and later joining them again. I re-unwrapped the UV for the new Cardigan edges because the solidify modifier had distorted the texture. For UV unwrapping, I've been using Mio 3 UV, a Blender add-on which I'll link in the video description. It makes unwrapping much easier and allows to create a grid in one click. Then I arranged the new parts on the UV map to make the texture look good. Some fine-tuning of the shape followed until I was happy with everything. The UV map in general had to be adjusted so all parts fit properly. Since it was easier for me in this case, I moved the shirt and skirt to a completely different section. However, you must be careful to stay within the correct area. And for better aesthetics, I changed the square faces into triangles. One new skill I've learned in recent months is creating custom textures with Substance Painter. This is a paid software that I can't do without in my current workflow. Whether it's worth it for you is something you'll have to decide for yourself. For Substance Painter, I needed to prepare the mesh. I added new materials and assigned them to the shirt and skirt. After that, I made a few small adjustments. Next, I saved the second version of the mesh and removed the body parts covered by my custom mesh, like the top and the legs, to avoid overlap issues in Substance Painter. Then I moved into Substance Painter. I won't share my exact settings yet, since I'm still learning and don't feel confident enough giving advice on that. But in general, I baked shading details and imported existing textures like the body texture and the cardigan texture I wanted to keep. Then I created textures for the shirt and skirt. I've done a lot of testing before, so now I have a small set of presets I can just drag in. Details were hand-painted or applied with specific tools. This method has opened so many new possibilities for me, even projects I might have given up on before. I definitely hope to keep learning and improving my texturing skills in the future. Next, I brought everything into Photoshop. I loaded all textures, including an exported UV layout for reference. And because I wasn't satisfied with my own texture for the skirt, I looked again to see if I could find a better one. I did find one and adjusted it accordingly. With this first test, I checked how everything looked on the model and made a few small improvements again. Next, I took an in-game asset with a similar shape to mine and transferred the weights. I wanted to do my first test in the game without immediately facing a monstrosity, since I had changed the mesh so much. And it actually looks pretty good for the first try. At this point, I tested the asset on different sims and tried styling the look in different ways. It's not really relevant for you, but it helps me get a vision for the picture I want to take as a preview for the CC. Next, I wanted to see how it would look if the shirt had a loose, tucked-in style. So I took the texture from another asset and tried to incorporate it into my own texture. But it didn't look great, and it didn't really make sense either, since the shirt is technically tightly tucked in. So I scrapped that idea. Then I made a few more small adjustments. There are probably never enough of those. And now it's time for the most time-consuming part, the color variations. First, I prepared all the texture parts and changed them into a light gray base so that I could apply recolor actions later. When working on textures, it's best to go step by step, even if that means ending up with a lot of layers. At this stage, I also tested different styles to see what direction I want to go in. Some were great right away, while others I later decided weren't good at all. For the cardigan, I used a lot of patterns. And those patterns I get from pattern.monster, which is a great website for that. After trying out a few different ideas, I checked them in-game and decided which styles I wanted to keep and which ones to discard. You have to set limits for yourself at the end of the day, or things will spiral out of control. Now it was time to download even more patterns, delete old color variations, and approach everything with a more targeted plan. Let me tell you, this whole process took a really long time, but I love all the variations I ended up choosing. At the end, I checked everything again in the game and styled different looks. Then came the more precise testing phase. I let the Sims walk around and sit down to see how the asset behaved. That's when I noticed the belly was moving strangely, but I had only transferred the weights once and hadn't done anything else yet. So just to be safe, I transferred the weights again from an in-game asset and also transferred the UV1 map using data transfer. I also did the vertex painting. When I reloaded the game, the belly still looked a bit weird. I checked the weights again, but couldn't find anything wrong. So I thought maybe it was the UV1 map. I merged the connection between the skirt and shirt into a single spot. But in the end, that didn't help either. So I decided to delete the connection completely. Visually, it didn't make much of a difference anyway. But the belly still looked strange to me. And I found a small hole, although it's possible that Paulina from the past only noticed it later. I transferred the weights again and also redid the data transfer for UV1. Now it was looking better. Another part of my testing process is applying the asset to heavier Sims. Here, for example, I noticed that the lower part of the outfit wasn't behaving as it should. That was due to the vertex paint. Initially, I had painted everything in a color that's used for tight-fitting outfits. But the lower part of the cardigan and skirt obviously aren't skin tight. For this situation, we have to use another color. In edit mode, I selected the lower part, switched to vertex paint mode, and applied the correct color to the selected area. I actually made a mistake here, but I realized that soon enough. To make the transition between the upper and lower part less harsh, I used the smooth vertex paint function. Can anyone spot what I did wrong? Yep, I applied the vertex paint color for loose-fitting items to the legs as well, which makes no sense at all. And I also didn't quite get the right spot for the transition. So I repainted everything with the original color and then carefully selected the correct part for the second color. Finally, I smoothed it out again. Much better now. Next, I created the LODs and set the correct tags. For the shadow map, I saved the shadows from the original assets and combined them into a new shadow map. I created the normal map using the normal map generator website and then refined it in Photoshop. In my cast tutorial, I showed how to do this in GIMP. Now I could style my kits again. But at this point, I discovered the hole I mentioned earlier, so I had to fix it by adjusting the mesh. I also noticed a small texture mistake, but I was able to fix that easily with the UV map only. And that was basically the entire creation process from start to finish. Now all that's left is to take some photos for the release. If you want to see more of these videos, let me know. Good luck on your CC making journey. Bye bye.